Well, hey, CFC friends and family online. It is Jim Clark with Pastor Brian for a little Q&A this afternoon, and sunny where Brian is this morning or this afternoon, and sunny where we are. So hopefully it's sunny wherever you are today. So we are excited to do a little Q&A with you this afternoon. So we'll just jump into it right off the bat here, Pastor Brian. So Poodle Noodle, what's up with that?
So what is up with Poodle Noodle? That's a great question. Well, frankly, the better person to ask would be Pastor Mike Haynes, because that was something. All right. So truth be told, this happens a lot as a pastors. We have people around us who say, "Hey, I bet you can't mention something in your sermon." And for me, people are always trying to get me to do some form of 80s music lyric because they know how much I love it. But for Pastor Mike, one of his high school students um, used the term poodle noodle. And so Mike, being very creative that he is, actually made a pretty good illustration, I thought, about what happens when you don't see correctly. And so I just kind of ran with it last week because he gave me credit for it, which probably wasn't. Well, we'll talk about that later on. But it's just the point is poodle and noodle, right? I mean, they're only one letter off, but they're completely different things.
Right.
And the reality of it is this is that when our lens isn't properly focused and seeing Jesus the way that he needs to be seen in truth, we can get one little thing off, right? And see it as a poodle when it's really a noodle. And it's
Yeah.
a pretty good illustration. And again, thank you to so many of you who continue to send me emails, texts, greetings, and such forth with poodle noodle. Tune in on Sunday. It may come back. You never know.
Yeah, and so if you have no idea what we're talking about, you can head over to our YouTube channel and watch 2 weeks ago's sermon, and then it reappeared last weekend as well with the final weekend of This Changes Things. So, jumping into a little bit of content from this weekend. So we talked a lot about meltdowns this weekend and your message on Sunday. So, what little personal question? What's been your biggest meltdown of 2020 so far, considering we're only in September?
Yeah, so that's a great question. When you first saw this question you were going to ask me, my natural reaction was to go to the fact that we all know that we were making this large physical location move from our former location at 21673 Bowling Circle in the middle of Data Center Alley to where we are now out at the intersection of One Loud and Atwater or Ashbrook. So because we wanted to be in a community. And the whole COVID thing happened the week before our move. We weren't able to have our last celebratory service in the old building, and we then were not able to have our first kickoff, and still haven't really had a kickoff. Right now, I'm thinking that maybe we'll get a 1 year celebration service or something in the new place. So that was a little bit of a meltdown. But I think how I work, and maybe people are different, is God is kind of in my particular personality blessed me with be able to endure big things. What I discover is it's the little things over time that build up, and then it's sort of that camel that breaks the straw that breaks the camel's back, rather, that I mentioned on Sunday. So actually, I think my biggest meltdown has come from just frankly being tired. Like I'm enduring this. Like right now, I'm again, once again, shooting from my house. I'm used to being in the office. You know, my kids are they're there. We've had internet problems today to help them with school. Any parent knows what I'm talking about. I mean, at any point in this interview right now, it can all go haywire, right?
Right. We can
And
have
I
a
don't
meltdown
like
at any
that.
point.
Right, right. And I've discovered how, if I'm truthful, how dependent I've become on my schedule and less dependent upon God.
Yeah.
And so to accomplish the things that he wants to accomplish, but he's still on the throne. And so my probably biggest meltdown is when I found myself out of sync with my schedule and not being able to do the things that I think I need to get done. And then I have this sort of like, God, I've got to get this sermon done, or God, I've got to meet this. Like, yeah, and he's like, and he says this really kindly. I spoke the world into existence. I still hold it together in place. I think I can rework your schedule. I think I can help you with this. And so, I've not had one of those moments, even though I will say this. On Sunday, I mentioned um, when I was speaking about when someone cuts you off immediately in front of you. And I kid you not, after I mentioned that, I had that happen so many times this week. And I really feel like God has a sense of humor because there was one time, but we won't get into it. Let's just say I had someone else in the car. My father was with me. And I was actually really glad that someone else was in the car to hold me accountable because I may have had a bad moment then.
So on Sunday, you mentioned pain blocking our view of Jesus. As a
Yeah.
pastor who did before COVID, now doesn't do probably as much because of COVID, because probably people just aren't doing a lot of counseling. Where do you see that kind of pain showing up for most folks in Northern Virginia? From a pastor's perspective.
Yeah, I would use two words to kind of generally describe a category. And these are the two words: unmet expectations. Whether we realize it or not, all of us come into scenarios, relationships, work scenarios, friends in the neighborhood, whatever it may be. And we have expectations, right? And they're not necessarily bad things, but a lot of times we don't realize how big those expectations are until they're not met. And especially if we're talking in relational context with a spouse or a kid, and we saw or felt like this relationship was going to go one way, and then something happens that takes it another way. Or our health, we thought, hey, we're going to be healthy and be able to do all this sort of stuff up to this particular age, and things change. We find ourselves dealing with this disconnect between what we thought was going to happen and what really is happening. Sometimes that disconnect actually brings physical pain if it's a health scenario. Sometimes it brings emotional pain, relational pain, psychological pain, certainly spiritual pain. And I think in those moments, when our expectations aren't met, the enemy really whispers into our ear a lot of times, because most of our expectations are good, right? And since those expectations are good, and when they don't play out the way that we thought they were going to, the enemy likes to whisper in our ear and say this: oh, God doesn't care about you,
Mm.
or he wouldn't let this pain happen. He wouldn't let that person say something negative to you, or you be laid off from this job, or he wouldn't let this relationship with your spouse turn left when it should have turned right here. And the list goes on and on and on. So I think for us, as I thought about this question, is that's really one of the great opportunities that the enemy has. And so when we find ourselves in that moment, and every single one of us are in a moment right now, because I guarantee you, whatever you were expecting 9 months ago for September, it wasn't this. It wasn't. Right. And how are we going to do with that? And that goes back to this thing that you're kind of asking next, that I think we become conditioned when we don't have met expectations, when it's difficult and challenged, that we begin to see graves all the time in those changes instead of gardens, I guess.
Yeah. So, because I don't think, anybody who picked, January 2020 and looked down the calendar and said, hey, I think this year is going to be all about this, had no
Mhm.
idea what was coming. And so I think most of us look around at 2020 and all the opportunities and things that we've missed and things that, and even, on the Facebook page today, we asked the question, what are you missing most since COVID? And so, probably a little bit more of a serious discussion question than we typically post for, interaction type questions on Mondays and Wednesdays. But, when you look at 2020, or when we look at 2020, we tend to see the graves and not the gardens. What do you think God is
Yeah.
tending in the midst of 2020?
Well, I think one thing that he might be intending is our spirit or our thought process of intentionality. I think when we get in certain patterns and that sort of stuff, we become in ruts, and we're less intentional about the things that matter most. We're less intentional about relationships with our family. We're less intentional about relationship with God. We're less intentional living out the gospel to the people around us. So I think he's creating those opportunities. And then as they're happening, he's showing, listen, a lot of these things that are occurring right now may never have occurred if it wasn't for the fact that you are now in the scenario that you're in because of COVID. I alluded to it loosely on Sunday. I've talked about it many, many times about I feel called to my neighborhood. My wife feels called to our neighborhood here in Brambleton. And we've done all kinds of stuff over the years. But frankly, in the last year or so, there's just been a lot of things that have come up that have made it less possible to do some things that we wanted to do. And certainly when the COVID scenario happened, we used to do something every Friday night in the summer. Jim, you've been to my house. We've done that
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
Friday night in the summer where people come together. You can't, we call it a grill and chill. You can't grill, you can't chill when this is. So what happened was is we started taking walks, and what we discovered was is we continued to take walks, we started to meet new people. And because here's the truth, people were so starved for relationships that they weren't before. They were willing to talk, they were willing to connect, and now our circle has grown. And the truth is, I'm not sure our circle of connection and friendship and opportunity for the gospel would have grown without COVID happening this way. And so I think one of the things for each of our lives that we have to do is, instead of automatically talking about, look at the negative things that happen, let's go back and say, what has occurred? So, like, for example, you and I both know this. Anyone who's watching this right now, they know that you're our online pastor, our director of communications. In this time of COVID, our connection, while at some people on a local level has decreased,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully it'll go back whenever it goes back to what happens, it'll
Right.
grow again to that. But our connection on a larger scale has increased. And we have people that we're reaching in ways that we wanted to reach, but let's just be honest, you and I know the stories behind it. We've had to speed up a whole lot of things what we wanted to do. That's why we see some glitches from time to time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And on plans, and God has been using those. And I think in every situation in our life, my challenge for us is to say, okay, yes, let's acknowledge this is painful. Let's acknowledge this is difficult. No one's saying live in denial, but also let's look at what God is doing that maybe would not have been accomplished without this occurring.
yeah. And I would say a good example of that, just in terms of what we're doing right now. If you're watching this on YouTube, and we know a lot of people do watch this on YouTube throughout the week, chances are good that you're watching this, and you've started watching this since COVID, because before COVID we had 100-ish or so subscribers, and now we're up to nearly 450 subscribers, which isn't a lot, but still it's a bigger audience than we had before, and a lot of that was driven because of COVID. So yeah.
Absolutely.
So we just wrapped up the This Changes Things series, and so if you missed a week of that or some of that or whatever, you can go back. You can find on YouTube a whole playlist of the whole series all the way through. So where are we going this coming weekend? What's coming down the pipe for us on Sunday morning?
So we're going to reintroduce something that maybe several people who've been a part of our community have heard many, many times. Maybe they haven't, I don't know. But we're going to talk about how we're interacting between change and how God is calling us to be an indispensable part of our community within 3 miles of here, within 5 years that we're here. How do we respond to that? What is God still calling us to do as a church? And what is God still calling you to do as individuals in the midst of that? And so we're going to bring back some things we've talked about. I'm going to be back in Hebrews chapter 11. I did a whole series on Hebrews chapter 11 about 11 months ago. I'm going to take some moments to remind some things, because it's amazing in the midst of all of this how easy it is to forget some stuff, but still the need, right, to build up our church community is there, and to reach out in our community is big. So we're going to take a pause for a week, and then we're going to hit in another series a week after that called Faith Forward. I'm excited about that series. I'm going to be teaching it. Pastor Chris is going to be teaching. Pastor Mike's going to be involved in that series too. It'll be a good time. So tune in Sunday, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you can join us Sunday morning wherever you're watching this right now, whether that's on Facebook or YouTube or the app or podcast or wherever. You can join us at 9:30 or 11. Be a part of that from wherever you are, whether it's here in Ashburn or Brambleton or South Riding, like typically we are, or maybe we had a couple of viewers from Texas on Sunday, and it's always kind of fun to see where people are checking in from. So wherever you're checking in from, we look forward to seeing you this Sunday morning, either here physically at CFC or here online at CFC. So have a great, great day.
Yeah.